Is it true that an LLC doesn't avoid personal liability? I thought that was the whole point. Well, a lot of people are under the misconception that an LLC can protect you against all personal liability. But unfortunately, an LLC won't actually protect you against liability, or at least all liability. Let me explain. A limited liability protects you as a shareholder or an owner of the company. So in your role as owner, you're protected. So let's say, for example, you own a company, and maybe there are some other owners as well. And those other owners hire a president, and then the president hires other people. As an owner of the company, you absolutely have limited liability. The idea here is that whatever you invest in the company is at risk, but you're not personally liable. However, there's a huge exception relevant to most business owners, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But let me tell you this first. When I was younger, I said, I think we should abolish corporations. What's the deal with corporations protecting these wrongdoers from liability? You know, you hear about these big scandals, and then the idea that the shareholders or the key people behind the scandal are somehow protected by this corporate shield, this limitation of liability. As you know, an LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. And it just feels so wrong for somebody who does wrong and uses a business to do it to be protected from personal liability. I mean, don't we have a country that's founded on the idea of personal responsibility? Now, I get that that may have eroded over the years, but it is a fundamental principle of law that people should be liable for their own conduct. And so I thought we should abolish corporations and limited liability companies. Get rid of it. Let's have everybody be liable for their own conduct. Hey, if you work in a business and you do stuff wrong, you're on the hook for it. These corporate CEOs shouldn't get off the hook, is what I thought. I still think that, but I no longer believe corporations and LLCs should be abolished. Here's why. I had a massive misunderstanding of how corporate law and LLC law works. The idea behind a corporation or LLC is that the owner has limited liability because the owner puts money in and has no further involvement. Might have some votes once a year, but that's the owner's role. And owners are protected from liability. But as soon as you get into the role of management or governance of an LLC or a corporation, now you have liability. So my old flawed thinking was that these corporate CEOs wouldn't have liability because they were protected by the corporate limited liability shield. But that was totally false. As a business owner, if you are running the company, you have exposure to personal liability. What is this called? And by the way, you might be shocked by this because a lot of business owners have no idea that they could be liable for the business and what happens in the business. The first legal doctrine is what's called negligent hiring. And that is when you hire somebody to manage your company without testing them and being careful to make sure they have the capacity to do the job in a proper way. That they have the character required to do it, they have the integrity, that they have the qualifications, the skills, perhaps the experience. If you are negligent in hiring a CEO or a president of your company, you can be liable for negligent hiring. Even though you're just the business owner. You're just the owner. You're not actually running the company. Now let's talk about negligent supervision. If you are not adequately supervising the CEO or president of a company, as a member of the board of directors or the board of governors or as a shareholder or as an owner of the company, if you are negligent in supervising, you also can have personal liability. So if the company does something wrong or the president does something wrong, they can go after you as an owner. Why? Because you have certain duties that you were negligent in. So this is why it's such a big deal. Now you might say, hey, what about if I'm not hiring a president or CEO? I am the president or CEO. I've got a little LLC. I just started it. Maybe you're the only worker in the company. If you are negligent in your duties, you can be liable for your conduct, whether that's hiring other people, managing other people. And now here's the problem. Let's imagine you hire an employee, and let's imagine that employee is being properly supervised by you. But hey, employees are human. They make mistakes. Am I saying that you are going to be liable for that employee's mistake? Well, that's decided by a judge. And although, generally speaking, you shouldn't be liable for mistakes like that, keep in mind that you may have an attorney on the other side arguing that you should be liable, and now you have to put forward a defense. Let me explain how this might look. Imagine that you hire an employee, and the employee's job is to set up the computer system for a hospital. And you are very careful to hire an employee with experience in compliance with data privacy laws related to health documents. And you also regularly supervise the employee. Let's say you meet with the employee on a daily basis, but the employee makes a mistake. And as a result, confidential health information of all of the patients of the hospital are accidentally available to the public. And somebody goes and downloads a complete copy, and all that stuff ends up on the internet. Clearly, the company is liable because it made a mistake. There's a question of, is the employee liable? But let's say that the company doesn't have a lot of assets. And so the hospital decides they want to sue you personally. The hospital will try to demonstrate that you failed to act as a reasonable person would when managing the employee who did the work and this project. And the attorney for the hospital has millions of dollars in interest or a motivation to show to a court that you should be liable. Well, what they'll go out and do is they will find an expert, somebody in the industry who knows this area of law and how this industry works. And they'll find an expert who will say, a person in your shoes would have been reckless to just rely on one person. There should have been redundancies and double checks. There should have been a review by somebody else. You should have had a team of experts in different categories who could prevent a massive problem like this from happening. You were well aware that if the data, the patient information, was released to the public, it would have a devastating consequence on all the patients and the hospital itself. So you had a obligation to act as a reasonable person would, a reasonably prudent person would, and prevent something like that from happening by implementing processes and procedures and accountability prior to the release of the data. And so they can sue you personally for negligent supervision of a person or of a project. And you might say, does this really happen? A number of years ago, the board of Disney, the big children's movie company, was sued. And they were sued for not adequately considering the compensation package for their CEO. The argument was that they had a meeting, they looked at the details, they approved the final numbers, but they didn't go into the details. They didn't ask enough questions. They didn't spend enough time analyzing this. These sorts of cases happen all the time, especially when the stakes are high. So what's the takeaway here? Just keep in mind that as a business owner, you have a risk of personal liability to the customers and clients of your business, to anyone who is involved in the business. And there has been an increasing push in Congress and state legislatures to hold CEOs personally responsible for decisions and results that happen in a company. And CEOs may say, hey, look, I was doing my best. I'm not perfect. And why should I be responsible for what one of my 400 employees did that I didn't even know about? Well, unfortunately, that's an issue for a court to make or decide many times. And so what's the takeaway here? Be very careful. Document what you're doing. Think twice about whether you want to sit on a board or you want to be the president of a company. Being an entrepreneur and a business owner is fantastic, but my job here is to let you know what are some of the risks that are present and how can you mitigate those risks. You mitigate the risks by hiring good people, setting up good processes, documenting the processes that you establish. It's not always possible. Of course, as a business owner, you have to decide, am I going to allocate resources to documenting this to minimize legal problems, or am I going to spend that time growing the business? There's always these decisions that you make in a business. So, it is absolutely true that a limited liability company does not eliminate your personal liability. It limits it, but if you stay involved in the company, if you continue to run the company, and if you're hiring the employees and establishing systems, you have the risk of personal liability. Now, practically speaking, what can you do? You can get insurance that can minimize some of that. Of course, being careful with hiring and supervision and all of that. And being aware of the risk is one of the first steps to making sure the team is attentive to those problems and doesn't let major problems happen. By the way, if major problems happen to you, consider it par for the course. Businesses encounter major problems all the time. If you have 50 employees, you are regularly going to have challenges with employees, challenges with customers. Business owners with 50 employees will tell you they just have an attorney who's ready and available to support them as time goes on. Some attorneys charge a retainer for that. Other attorneys are just available as needed. But this is where a business attorney can be very valuable to you in your state, helping you navigate these issues. By the way, I'm not doing this to promote my services as an attorney. You need to find an attorney in your state who can work with you. Since attorneys are licensed by state, I only represent clients in Minnesota. But I provide this YouTube channel so that you can identify what are the issues out there and how can you avoid personal liability and expensive legal problems. If you are the type of person who is interested in avoiding legal problems by growing a great, healthy company, a strong team where you are managing businesses and you are managing the people in your company or companies, you are welcome to get our free resource, which equips you with what you need to know in contract law, intellectual property law, compliance with state and federal laws, and all sorts of other important areas that come up in running a business as an entrepreneur and as the leader of an entrepreneurial company. You can get it at aaronhall.com/free. There's no charge, and it's a way that you can get access to exclusive resources, videos, checklists, etc. that I've put out to help guide business owners to avoid problems. This is all part of this YouTube channel in an effort to help business owners avoid problems, to save money on legal fees, to avoid the painful distractions that lawsuits can bring or government investigations. The last thing you want to be is having a target on your back for lawsuits, or government audits or investigations. If you go to aaronhall.com/free, you will start getting access to the resources so that you can become empowered with education to avoid these problems in your company, so you can achieve business success and have a successful life. I'm Aaron Hall, an attorney for business owners and entrepreneurial companies. To learn more about me, feel free to go to aaronhall.com.